Welcome back everybody to another episode of Moto Bob Vlogs, and today I'm out on the brand new KTM 790 Duke. This is new for 2023, kind of. I mean, it's an interesting one because the 790 Duke was in their lineup a few years back. They gave it more capacity and then updated it as the 890 Duke, and now this one's back. But this time it's made by CFMoto out in China, which has allowed them to offer it at a very tempting price point, so $7,999. So in this video, we'll take it out for a little spin and find out if these new Chinese-built KTMs are just as good as the originals. I mean, thing is, as soon as you hit the road, it does feel extremely familiar if you've ever ridden a KTM before. I mean, especially for this part of the market where middleweight nakeds are built to be quite versatile in their appeal. You know, they're meant to be ridden by newer riders, less experienced riders, as well as more experienced riders and ridden a bit harder, especially considering that this does feel pretty sporty. The suspension's not adjustable and it's set up pretty firm. I think you've got preload on the rear, of course, but yeah, otherwise no adjustability, and it's definitely been set up to, you know, carve through corners. The scalpel they call it, or they used to anyway. Now you've got the 890 Duke as the scalpel in their lineup, but this still feels scalpel-like. And look, the braking is nice and sharp as well. I think they're probably J1 made calipers and all the hardware. That's usually the case for KTM bikes, but this has KTM branding on the hardware. It's a great little bike, this though, really fun to ride. You know, it's lightweight, it's agile, it's flickable, just as you'd expect. And I think the other thing that helps is, like I say, a lot of the bikes in this part of the market are built to be accessible, certainly in the seat height. And sometimes stuff like the Honda Hornet, they suffer a little bit in terms of being up and over the bike and feeling like you can get into a sporty riding position. It makes sense, right? If you're commuting in town, using it for stuff like that, you want something where you can get your feet down quickly. And learners obviously are going to feel more, or newer riders, let's say, are going to feel more reassured by being able to quickly plant both feet down. This bike, though, does sit a little taller. Now, there are low seat options. I think there might be a lowering kit as well, but out of the box, this is a sporty riding position. Not super aggressive. Your weight is still majority on the saddle, so it's not got you over the bars in a, you know, in an uncomfortable way, but it's enough to feel engaged when you're riding quicker through corners. You've got plenty of ground clearance as well. It feels tall. In fact, this feels much more, versus the other bikes I've just been talking about, like a supermoto style riding position, which you'd totally expect from a KTM. As for the engine, well, again, this is a big one for me to give it that KTM flavor, and one of the key things that I notice about their bikes is the liveliness of the throttle, and it's done so well. It's not done in a way that's kind of like choppy and annoying to get on with. The initial contact with the throttle is perfectly set up, but it's the next 3 to 4 millimeters where there's just loads of shove, just surges forward so eagerly. It's so fun to ride. And you know, this bike is a little down on power versus the 890 and versus the 790 it preceded, because I think what they've done is put it at 95 horsepower to make it legal to restrict down to A2 levels. So if you're a A2 learner, you can buy this bike, get it restricted, and then once you get your full license, de-restrict it and get the full 95 horsepower, and that level of power allows them to legally do that. So yeah, it's not super powerful, and if you do fully, you know, pin the throttle wide open, this is not a bike that's gonna blow your mind. I'm riding at the same time as this, I've got another press bike, a Ducati Street Fighter V4S. Now that is a bike where you daren't pin it open on a lot of the roads because it will literally send you straight through the nearest hedge. This is, you know, it's got enough to be really, really fun to ride, but when you do pin it open at higher speeds, you can tell it's a sub 100 horsepower bike, and that's totally acceptable for this price point. But what they've done so well is that initial surge with the throttle, especially in sport mode. To be honest, even when it's greasy and wet like this, because that initial contact with the, when you just crack the throttle open, because it isn't too aggressive, there's no jolt, you can run it in this mode. I've just been riding it in this the whole time, and it's really very, very, very nicely done. Woo! Then you've got the sound of the engine. So they're V-twins like the Super Duke, and Super Adventure S and Super Duke GT, all those big 1290s, are 75-degree V-twins, I believe. And so they give their parallel twins like this and the 890s a 75-degree interval on the crank, which gives it, I believe, a 435-degree firing interval. Very techy, possibly doesn't sound that interesting, but I think what is interesting about it is it gives it a nice sound that is firstly reminiscent of more premium KTMs, which is always a good thing when you're buying a bike at this price point. You want it to give you some of the vibe of the, you know, hero products of that brand. But also we've got plenty of parallel twins with a 270-degree crank that sound like a 90-degree V-twin. So the Honda Hornet, the CP2 parallel twin in the Yamaha MT-07 and all of the other bikes that are based upon that platform. You got your Bonnevilles from Triumph, you've got the Interceptor and the other 650s from Royal Enfield. You've got the 660s from Aprilia, you know, the Touareg, the RS, the Tuono 660. You've got the bigger Hondas like the 1100s, the Africa Twin, the Rebel, the NT, the new V-Strom or P-Strom should we call it, from Suzuki, and the GSX 8S. Plenty of bikes, parallel twins with 270-degree cranks. And so it's not exactly the most original or unique feeling or exciting feeling engine configuration. Now we're only talking 15 degrees out, 75 to 90, but these bikes certainly do have their own little flavor. And so it's just another thing that I appreciate, and another thing that I'd say that even despite the fact that it's made by CF Moto in China, makes this feel like a KTM. Now the thing that I was expecting to be poor on this bike perhaps would be the level of finish and the feel of some of the hardware and plastics and all that kind of thing, because that's where you'd expect a Chinese bike to come up short. Certainly in my experience in the past, I have seen that. They're built to a budget, possibly built to different standards, and so naturally you might expect it to feel a bit cheap. But I think what a lot of the manufacturers are doing when they're building their bikes out in Asia now are using the same, you know, quality control tests and the same processes and the same systems, and just ending up with a bike that's more affordable to produce. So you'll see the same thing with Triumph building their bikes in Thailand. You'll see Honda building their bikes outside of Japan. KTM have been doing it for a while, of course. Bajaj make their sub 390 bikes in India. Bajaj are also going to be making the new baby Bonnevilles for Triumph, and so perhaps that's how they're achieving this decent finish that I've seen on these bikes. I'm pretty impressed. When I picked it up, I was expecting something a lot more budget looking, but really you'd be very hard pressed to look at this bike and tell the difference between this and a 790 that was produced by KTM, you know, a couple of years ago when they finished making them. Now I'll use plenty of B-roll to illustrate my point here, and perhaps KTM are somewhat aided by the fact that their bikes are not really built to be super premium, like chromed out and lots of metal kind of looking. They're meant to be sort of race bikes for the road, almost with a bit of a dirt bike feel, and I think that might aid them. You know, they're plasticky already, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, because it does make them feel super aggressive, and it's part of their flavor. Everything is lightweight and it's meant to be a racy feeling bike. You get a firm saddle and it all feels a certain way, and maybe that's a little bit easier to achieve with a Chinese build than something that's meant to have luxury and soul to it, and, you know, something like a Harley or even maybe like a retro like a Bonneville. The only thing I can't speak for is how long it'll last in terms of reliability and longer term ownership issues like, you know, corrosion or reliability, all that kind of thing. Obviously we don't know yet because these are brand new. This is one of the first bikes in the country and it's only got 127 miles on the clock. Only time will tell really. We'll have to wait until a few people have owned them for a year or two. I always check the MCN user reviews at the bottom of their reviews because you get some good insights there, but also I'm sure there are KTM forums to do that kind of research. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments. 7,999, very tempting. I mean, it's only a little bit more than, you know, the Z650, the MT-07, the Trident, a grand more than the Hornet, so that's a fairly substantial difference, but certainly, you know, the other bikes that are getting towards 8 grand, this is a very sporty, fun, lively package versus some of those other bikes, and so I can see it being very tempting. Certainly delivers on the thrills. I've very much enjoyed it. There'll be a full review over on the main channel, so do check it out if you fancy giving it a watch. Many thanks for watching. I hope you're all well, and I'll see you next time.